Thanks very much for joining us for episode 41 of InTek Freight and Logistics, the podcast. I'm Kevin Baxter, joined by my co-host for this edition, InTek CEO Rick Lagore. Hi, Rick.
Hey there.
And on this episode, we are tackling a key link in supply chains that we haven't really taken a deep dive into in our previous 40 or so episodes, warehousing. And to do that, we've got a guest who's well-versed in several aspects of the industry, John Bollman. He is the Senior Vice President, Industrial Services with a commercial real estate advisory firm, Cresa. John, thanks very much for joining us.
Kevin and Rick, thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
Appreciate it.
So to start with, tell us a little bit more about your background in the industry. Before we got started, we talked a little bit about it. You've kind of moved through some different aspects of it, and then also let us know what you're doing with Cresa right now.
You bet. So I started my career at UPS. So I spent a number of years in the small parcel industry. That got me involved with a number of larger operations. I really was drawn towards the warehouse distribution side. It was kind of at the dawn when UPS had just started their supply chain solutions group. I had gone to my boss and said, during a review, and said, boy, that really kind of draws me. And he said, listen, keep doing what you're doing. You've got a couple more assignments here in the parcel industry. Give it 10 years or so, and we'll probably be able to move you over towards that part of the business. Mm-hmm. When I was in my 20s, 10 years seemed like forever. So I was very fortunate right around that time. A company called Osborne Hesse Logistics, which was later known as OHL, which is now known as Geodis. We started some conversations and took a job with them and spent a good chunk of my career there as they were growing their U.S. network. So it was a great introduction to 3PL. They're a wonderful organization. Still have a lot of good friends that are there. And also had a stop at DHL as well. So the first part of my career was with 3PLs, and in the last 3 years, I made a change, and I wasn't looking to. So one of the things that DHL does extremely well, I think better than any other 3PL in North America that I'm aware of, is to leverage the real estate side for themselves and for their clients. So I had a mutual friend who worked, her name was Diana Mueller. She worked at a company called Fortna. You guys probably run across Fortna in your life. Yep. And she said, hey, there's someone that wants to have lunch with you. They've got some technology. He works for this company. We were called ESRP at the time. We since merged with Cresa. I came and looked at some of the technology they had, and I said, boy, you know what? When you work at DHL, the largest logistics company in the world, so you get really used to having access to the best and brightest of everything. And I'm thinking, well, why does this, relatively small real estate company in Dallas have this technology that would really make my life better and easier? And I was taken with it. What I didn't realize is that, hey, can you come have lunch and look at some technology? Really was kind of an undercover job interview. So we spoke for, a few months and went back and forth. Candidly, I think it's an oath that all 3PL people take, is that you must not like your commercial realtor. So I was raised in an environment where commercial realtors were not necessarily our best friends. Probably I was surprised, but as I spent more time, the gentleman's name is Brad Struck, learn more about the organization, learn more about what they do, learn more about the focus they had on industrial real estate. I was taken with it. So I made the change to a full-time industrial real estate broker about 3 years ago.
And so since we're going to go sort of 30,000 foot here on warehousing, sure. Let's start with why it's so important to supply chains.
Sure. I mean, it is a necessary component, right? It is the piece that, depending whether you're importing, whether you're exporting, et cetera, right? But just, as transportation, we've got air, we've got ocean, we've got over the road, we've got rail, right? That's what connects it all, right? That is the connective tissue in my mind. So you're either you're doing a plant support, right? There's a lot of that on the front end, right? And then on the back end of it, regardless of your channel of distribution, you're going to need to carry an inventory of some sort, and that's where the warehouse operations. Also in those warehouses is I'm sure you all run across, sometimes there's value-added service that are done. We're building pallets, we're breaking down cases and putting those into each, there's a lot of different things that go before it reaches the consumer or a retail organization. And that's where the warehouse piece is a valuable part of it.
So on the warehousing piece, over our careers, we've seen a lot of change. Who really owns them and runs them at this point in time? 3PLs have really taken hold in the last 15, 20 years. Are they the ones typically running it, or is it the manufacturers, or who's got that control?
It's still, and good question, Rick. I've seen it in my career too. The vast majority are controlled, by brands, by retailers, et cetera. So 3PLs, I think the latest statistics, it's still less than 20% of the total industrial footprint is occupied by 3PLs. So it is manufacturers and brands, as you said, that control these locations.
Okay.
So what distinguishes those 20%? I mean, you mentioned the value-added services. What are the 3PLs doing with their warehousing versus, the retail, the production-owned facilities?
Yeah, and I think the big differentiating factor is going to be many 3PLs operate multi-client warehouses, right? Coke and Pepsi don't share warehouses, right? But in a 3PL environment, right, you're going to have many clients under one roof. There are a lot of advantages. I spent a good part of my career, selling those services, and to be able to spread out, management and labor and equipment over different accounts, right, that have various seasonalities, various demands, it can be a wonderful opportunity for clients. But I think that's really the big differentiator is that the 3PLs often have multi-clients, but there's a good amount of them. DHL, almost all their operations in North America are dedicated, right? So it is, one warehouse, one brand.
Got it. Sitting here in Indianapolis, I'm a little bit surprised in your answer on the 3PLs not occupying a bigger chunk than 20%, because we go drive by the airport and there's millions and millions of square foot sitting in, at least in Indianapolis, that is basically a 3PL than it is brand-owned stuff.
Sure.
So very interesting.
Yeah.
So, the other another aspect that's certainly changed over the years, that 15-year period or so that you just talked about, Rick, is e-commerce. So how does that factor into sort of where warehouses are, what they do? What's different now that there's so much e-commerce out there?
Yeah, good question, Kevin. And that's something that has evolved throughout my career. I can remember, some of the first, DCs that I worked in, right, where we started to do e-commerce. So it's very different. Obviously, if you just, from a high level, what the orders look like, right? We're not moving pallets. We're not moving cases. You're generally moving an each, right? So you're bringing in cases, on one side of a building and shipping out eaches on the other. The head count is dramatically higher, right? Sometimes in a pallet in, pallet out environment, you can have a 200,000 square foot distribution center and have 10, 15 employees in there at the most, right? Where in an e-commerce operation of a similar footprint, you might have 3 shifts, 150 people a shift, right? So there's many differences there. I think the ability to automate is far greater in these as well. So that's a factor when you're putting in thinking about layout and design of a distribution center. Hey, how is this going to handle automation? A big one we've been running into a ton lately is power. The requirements of power have just changed so much. It used to be, hey, we're going to charge our forklifts, like power was almost an afterthought, where it's something now you're leading with. So the automation draws a ton of power. AI, I know we're going to talk about that later, is a huge power draw. So
in terms of
a lot of evolution.
Yeah. Absolutely. In terms of securing space, how do shippers go about it? Do they engage? Does the realtor companies support the analysis, or do they bring in their own consulting team to try to figure out how to lay out these warehouses, or how does the whole process go from start to finish in terms of designing a facility and commercial realty get involved?
Sure, and I think it's multi-pronged, Rick. You brought in or brought up a couple different folks that are going to be part of it. I think number one, which you all deal with a lot, is where is this going to go? Kind of the dots on the map, the network optimization that says, hey, we're going to have 2 DCs, 3 DCs, 5 DCs, right? And here's the markets they should be in. I think that's a good step one. Right. We help our clients with that too, but there's a lot of other places that you can get that. There's a lot of commercially available software, a lot of consulting folks that can help with that. I think number two is, what does the DC look like? So here's we're going to size the box. It needs to be 200,000 feet, whatever the square footage is, and what's going to go on inside. Is this going to be single-sided? It's going to be a cross dock, right? What are we looking at for stack heights? So let's start to visualize what the actual facility itself is going to look like. Then the third part, which is where we come in, is commercial realtors. And to be clear, we want to be involved in step one and step two as well. Mm-hmm. It's not where our expertise is, right? But we want to be a part of that. And then step three is, okay, we know it's going to go in, let's just use Indianapolis, right? What part of Indianapolis? So we will run a survey. That's always a step one for us. And I'll tell you, the vast majority of my career, that was kind of the beginning and the end. You run a survey, okay, within the greater, Indy metro area, there are 20 buildings available in the size range that we're looking for. I think the mistake that listen, I was part of that. I think many people make that. You kind of run your finger down the rent column. Okay, here's A, B, and C. These look like the top 3 prospects. Let's get in the car. Let's go take a look at them and let's make a decision, right? And that was kind of the end of the road. And something that we are super, you've got to just look at a lot more factors than that. We look a ton at what labor looks like, right? That's where we start. Is if you look at, let's just use Plainfield as an example that you mentioned earlier. What does the labor profile look like? What is the cost of labor? What is the supply of labor? Is labor coming to that market over time? Is labor going away from that market? So that's where we come in and say, hey, so here's the buildings that are available. Here's the 10. Let's really get to know our client. How does their product come in? Is this coming in on rail? Is this coming in on ocean, et cetera? And start to score those, right? So that's part of the proprietary technology that we use, where we'll take a list, again, a list that we used to just kind of look at in a vacuum. All right, that one looks cheap. That one looks, near the restaurant I like, whatever, those kind of things. Not really data-driven solutions. You'd be amazed. This one's close to my home. That's for a nice commute, right? So we'll map out and say, hey, if this is a new location, if it's a new location, we'll go study one of your existing locations. We'll take demographic information and say, what type of people like to work for your company, right? We'll put those in one of 71 buckets. We'll say, all right, which location gives you the best access to those type of people, as an example, right? Again, as I mentioned, if there's a data source for it, we're going to factor it into the decision process of choosing that new DC, and then we'll score. We can adjust those scores dynamically as we're moving forward. And it's really a data-driven idea, because it's a static part, and I think it's a shame. I think one of the things that 3PLs have done to the marketplace is where people make decisions and say, well, I'm going to put my DC here. They don't want to hire, and understandably, you're starting a new relationship with a 3PL. Hiring, getting into a 10-year agreement or a 20-year agreement is, just filled with concerns, as it should be. But the location of the DC, that's not going to change. You've got a manufacturing plant here. You import this percent. Those aren't going to change. I think those are longer term decisions, and you get comfortable with those. But you got to get more comfortable with them based on data. And oftentimes, I think people just say, "Hey, my 3PL's got a campus in Plainfield. I guess it's the right answer, right? And it might not be. So you make a short-term decision. You're doing startup after startup after startup, because you're making these 5-year decisions, and it's a lot of wasted time and resources.
Great.
So when you're going through the process then with Cresa, are you actually, is all of this going, all of these factors, are they all going together and then creating like, 1, 2, 3 ranking kind of thing with like an overall score then?
Yeah, we do. So we literally score them 1 through 100, and we will say, hey, these are all the available facilities. And the part that I should have made really clear on the upfront, time is super important on this. In the best case scenario, if we're talking to you 18 to 24 months ahead of a need, is ideal. And I think that the bad decisions, like a lot of bad decisions in business, are made because you're in a hurry.
Mm.
So yes, we will go in and say, hey, and we always want to have the ability, and I'll make it clear when I say build or buy, right? It doesn't have to be with your capital. Someone's like, well, I'm not in a position to go build a building. That's okay. We can find capital partners to go buy or build something. It just opens it up, right? And I think that's a big mistake that people make, is when the shop clock is running and you got to have something open. You put in your last annual report, we're going to add a West Coast DC, in 2024. You limit yourself, and you get to a point where all you can do is grab something that is available for lease. And we like to start every discussion with, hey, does it make sense to buy it, build it, or lease it?
So speaking to that, so where does the industry stand right now? I mean, we went through the pandemic, and absorption was super high on the warehousing side. Has it backed off? Are there specs still being built, or has the spec market disappeared and it's more build to suit, or kind of where does the industry sit today?
Yeah. So I think the pendulum swung more back. I mean, it was definitely, we only represent tenants, and we're somewhat unique in the industry in the fact that, we never represent landlords. We only represent tenants. We don't want to have a conflict. We don't want to be sitting across the table from someone negotiating a lease, knowing that we represent the other side of their business. Right. So, so we think that pendulum has swung back more towards the tenant. Right. But you are absolutely correct. During COVID, it was very landlord driven. There was not enough space. The rents were accelerating rapidly. I mean, it was a tough spot. Right now, you asked about development. Development has slowed, but there's still development going on. There is more space than there are tenants, right? Which is good for tenants. The one thing that is not in favor of tenants right now is the rates. The landlords have really held on to the rates, and it's rare that they have an opportunity where they can drive rates like they did during COVID. So understandably, they're hesitant to give that back now. But in terms of negotiating free rent, tenant improvement dollars, and those things, that's where we can get your net effective rent, to a much more favorable position. So I would say there was a lot of concern and a lot of justifiable concern during COVID on finding space. We certainly had more, assignments than we could find space for our clients during COVID. That is not the case now. If you need industrial warehouse space in North America, we will be able to find that for you. And, again, the terms have started to swing back towards the tenants.
In terms of overall markets across North America, there's a lot of discussion about nearshoring and product moving closer and going into Mexico versus being made overseas. With that said, are you seeing it as the border towns or the border states seeing, are they hotter markets or more difficult to get into right now for space?
In terms of space, they have not been the traditional development markets.
Okay.
No one wants to be the pioneer, right?
Right.
So, if you wanted to be safe, we'll go build a building in the Inland Empire, right?
Right.
It's the largest port in North America, and you're going to have business. Those markets have made great strides during my career. I think the amount of nearshoring and onshoring, it has not accelerated as much as I think we'd all kind of hoped it would. So, but COVID certainly showed us that, hey, the dependence on these primary North American ports, is a challenge. Now, what I'm always amazed with is, we heard a lot about, ships not being unloaded back up in LA Long Beach, during COVID. And it seems like, a labor issue, we've had a number of those during my career. It seems like every time we get past one, we get real short memories and we go back to the same habits. So we saw a lot of, during COVID, our clients' leases coming due and people saying like, holy cow, I've got I was on a 5-year lease. My lease came due, the renewal proposal I got was 2x what I thought or where I was paying. So then the process goes, and we use our data and analytics team a lot for this, is there another market that can support my customer base as effectively? Right? Tell me what Phoenix looks like. Tell me what Las Vegas. Tell me what Reno Sparks looks like. Do we diversify? I mean, that seems to me to kind of be a no-brainer. If you're 100% dependent on a port that, historically, every 2 to 3 years, there's something, right? There's something so do we start bringing some of it in the East Coast to diversify that a little bit? So we do a lot with our data and analytics team to help our clients with that. And it's a great exercise.
So with the freight industry in general, we have certainly the issue where we've been in a little bit of a downturn for a while.
Yeah.
Where would you say the health of the warehousing market is? And, going between, you said it's more favorable to tenants than it's been in the past. What's like the ideal balance there?
Sure. I think the ideal balance is somewhere with the vacancy. Historically, it's been 7.1% is the historical number, right? So around 7% vacancy keeps everyone comfortable. The landlords aren't at a point where they've got a lot of empty space. It's not generating any revenue, right? But the consumer, the tenant, has enough availability opportunities that when they need space, there's space out there. Mm-hmm. I think we're at a good point at that right now, right? I think if you ask landlords, there's a little more availability than they'd like. Mm-hmm. So that's where I say it's more of a tenant market. But I think overall the industry is healthy. The metrics that we look at on development, on rates, on yields, on all those metrics are in a good spot right now. So I think overall, I think probably the greatest challenge that we saw during COVID, there were two, right? It was just availability of space and it was availability of labor. And I think people have gotten a lot smarter. I think that we have seen, wages increase quite a bit for traditional warehouse workers. We do an exercise with our clients where I mentioned earlier, we'll go in to start with, we kind of bump up their employee data against some proprietary data that we have and just say, hey, demographically, here's what your workforce looks like. Then we take another data source, it's an MIT living wage data, and we'll say, okay, so for that group, right, what do they need? So we can look at basically by their address, and we can kind of tell what their home life looks like. Okay, they're, a single parent with 2 kids. Then we take the MIT living wage, put that over the top of it and say, well, what does it take for them to make their, responsibilities on a month in and month out basis? I think the biggest challenge that folks face is they think they're hiring, a long-term employee and they're hiring a temp. Because what the warehouse industry has done is with technology, they've made it super easy. You can go out, look for a job on Monday, apply for a job on Tuesday, and if, in some cases, have a paycheck on Friday, right? Which is great. It also attracts folks that just have a short-term need, right? It's like, hey, I need to get my car fixed. I need to pay my rent. I need to do those kind of things, right? But if you look at what their underlying profile looks like, what the needs of their family are, et cetera, it's never going to be a long-term situation, right? The job just isn't paying enough to meet their needs, over time. So we spend a lot of time with our clients on that piece, right? And understanding not only what type of folks like to work for you, and we'll look at historical data and say, hey, you hired 100 people, right? There's 25 remaining who worked, who didn't. We can look at time, attendance, safety, those factors as well. But it's really important. And then I think probably the greatest mistake that we see is aligning, a recruiting campaign with how your primary candidates, uptake media, right? I always look at, I'm sure you guys have seen these, I'm sure they're around Plainfield, that inflatable waving arm. That is like we've admitted that everything else doesn't work. Like we don't know what we're doing, right? We open up the catalog and order, like just get an arm. We'll try an arm for you. But it's so important to say, okay, hey, this group of folks, and I always use the example with my kids. I've got a 22-year-old and a 24-year-old. For years before they started working, forget about email. And I would get so organized. This night, we're going to have a family dinner. These are the dates of our next vacation, all these things. And I'd send my meeting invites and my emails, and they were also organized. And they never paid any attention to me. That's just not how they consume media. Right. I should have sent them a TikTok or, whatever. So getting those two things aligned, I think is really, really important. And when we go to help our clients, that's where we get the best feedback is like, boy, you know what? We didn't, we'd never laid it out and figured out what part of town our workers are coming from. And, we've had a lot of success with billboards, but our billboards were in the wrong part of town.
Right.
It's those kind of things. So I think getting smart with employees, finding, different areas of folks that are interested in a logistics career has been a big takeaway from COVID. So again, I think from an employee perspective, listen, you just can't throw out the net, 2015, right? Just throw out the net. I spent a lot of my career, we'd get a new deal. Hey, we need 100 employees. We never gave it any thought. Never gave it any thought. Just like, hey, just took it for granted that it was there, right? And I think people have gotten smarter. So, but I'm still a big believer. You got to be smart about it, but you'll get the space and you'll also find labor.
So with labor being one of the biggest components, are you, and in some cases it's a challenge, are you seeing more automation going in the warehousing space at this point?
For sure, that is a part of it, and I think that was, you saw when the labor shortage, maybe a good part of that labor or perceived labor shortage was there was a whole lot more investment going into automation. Right? I think everyone kind of said, "Wow, this is something we took for granted forever. We need to have a a backup plan, so to speak." It is there is a lot more on automation than ever. But at the end of the day, right, you still need people to operate and run these warehouses. You just do. So, listen, can a humanoid go in and unload an ocean container? Presently, the answer to that, and I've got some good friends in this area, the answer just is no. Right? You can't just say, you three humanoids go, you hire, a lumper, as you guys, that's the kind of common vernacular, and they do this. So it would be great if that were the case, but there are things that can be automated, but the part that I'm always a little, it can help, but it's not a 1-for-1. I don't get one humanoid and one person comes off my payroll, right? If, I can go get a robot that'll help me with picking, but again, it's not that one person comes off the payroll.
So are you seeing any changes as in the past year or two with AI coming on as a bigger topic, or is it still more a topic versus actual practice?
In the warehouse and distribution side and the 3PL side, we see it in the recruiting. It's definitely, there's no one that it's not on their radar. I think every business AI is on their radar. The practice part in the freight side, right? I think there was a lot of AI that came along and really helped with profitability, but I think it was also at a time, where there was a whole lot of volume and not a whole lot of capacity too. Right. So I think as you kind of peel that back and figure out what exactly happened there, but it was certainly a super efficient way in the freight industry to connect, shippers and carriers, right? Rapidly and inexpensively. So all that was great. I have not seen that same level of use in warehouse operations. But again, I think the 3PLs, 100% of my client base is 3PLs, right? And there's not a quarterly business review that we have with our clients where AI is not brought up at some point during the day at some level. When it comes to actual warehouse operations, I think it's great. I think we're still on the front end of that.
Okay. All right.
So which areas is it, do you see it getting into more? I mean, are we talking in like the WMS kind of situation where it's just making them more robust, or are there even other solutions that may be coming on the horizon?
Yeah. Where I've heard of the most opportunities are in the WMS side, as you mentioned. And it's, the idea of learning as you go, right, in a WMS and not having to build functionality for every, unique task is a great thing. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But I think on the WMS side is probably where we'll see the most.
And I think it's interesting just talking about the labor versus the automation. And I mean, you touched on it without directly touching on it. I mean, What is automation doing right now that is it just making things easier to do certain tasks while you still need an employee there? I mean, you've throughout this conversation talked about the fact that you still need people in these warehouses. So so what are the functions that you're seeing most used for automation right now? And you mentioned there's some other stuff that maybe comes down the line a little bit further with more technology.
Yeah, I think, speed, ease, accuracy, those are the areas where technology has helped. But again, just not not reduced labor,
Yeah.
in a one for one. So, if you're going to put 40,000 SKUs, accurately, into a warehouse, right? No one's brain can remember where 40,000 SKUs are in a warehouse, right?
Right.
So technology, right? Hand them a gun, stick it in their hand, a phone, whatever, boom, I'm picking an order. It's going to lay out a pick path for me that's efficient where I can have the least amount of steps. If I get the least amount of steps, I'm going to get the most orders out the door with the least amount of people in a day. That's a good thing,
Mhm.
right? So again, it helped. We're gonna scan a barcode on that, as I'm picking that order. So a blue shirt, extra large, and a red shirt, right? So I'm gonna get the right products. Again, these are all things that help and assist, but it's not, I'm gonna take the human element out.
Yeah. So you mentioned power as another factor with more automation, more AI. So has that changed your sort of weighting when you're doing scoring? When obviously labor is important, location's important, but you also have to be able to
You
support.
bet. And it's a long lead time item, right? So what's existing in a market, right? What the infrastructure looks like, what the cost of power is. We do a lot with incentives. So we'll get our incentives team up. There is, round numbers, a megawatt of power costs $500,000 to bring it to, and we've got a client we're working with now. They need 12 megawatts, right? They are building and testing AI servers. That's their business model. They need 12 megawatts, right? So that's $6 million right from the jump just to get the proper power to the building, let alone moving that power within the building, right? Which there's a large cost to as well. So getting our incentives team active on the front end, understanding what parts, what municipalities are best for investment, what have existing infrastructure. It's an area that has become super intense. And again, from a timing perspective, sometimes you're looking at 18 months, which generally people don't, they're not calling me when they've got 18 months.
Right.
I wish they did.
Right.
We do better work, right? But so, yeah, I think it's only going to continue.
So Rick mentioned, the border states as is that the area where there's more development? You mentioned Inland Empire, which I think people in the industry are very familiar with as a location that, as you said, is the safe place to keep building. But are there any areas in particular that you are seeing becoming? Is there something that's going to become the next Inland Empire in 10 years or something like that? Or what's happening with locations right now?
Yeah, and I think the secondary ports have the infrastructure in those ports, especially on the eastern seaboard, in the last 10, 15 years has become much more substantial, right? The sailing schedules, the available warehousing space, et cetera, right? They're on par. And for a while, they certainly just weren't, right? So I think that's a big area of growth. What I love to see is, these are data-driven decisions. It's not just the kind of follow me, that like, hey, if we want to be safe and build a, DC, there's many markets that are just getting bought, right? That the traditional infill locations, there just isn't opportunity, there isn't dirt, right, to develop. So I think there's a lot where people say, hey, let's follow the labor. I think e-com itself has kind of changed the game a little bit, right? So some of these markets that weren't on the map for a traditional, big box DC distribution market, are now in play. So that part's interesting as well. I don't, and people ask me this question a lot, and I wish I had an answer. I really don't. Is what's the next? Where's the next hot market? What's the one we want to get out of and get in. I don't have the answer to that. I'd be lying if I told you. So
you own a lot of real estate there, probably.
Well, yeah, and you know what? There's a whole lot of people playing that game, and you know, and listen, it just doesn't seem to me there's a clear winner, right? I think what I like to see is continued investment. We've seen that in the border towns; those have become, much more robust, much more modern DCs that are available now in all the border towns. I think, in North America we have just such a blessing, right? That we can use all the, many different modes of transportation. We can bring things in, bring product in through the east, bring product in through the west, we've got great infrastructure, right? We can bring it in air, we can bring it in ocean. We can, there's all kinds of different ways to bring it in, and we're going to have an infrastructure that will support you.
One thing that I should have mentioned earlier, but we've said the word warehouse, and you've talked a lot about DCs, distribution centers. So are they pretty much one and the same now? I mean, years back, there was a little bit more of a delineation maybe between this is where we store things and this is where we fulfill from.
This is where we distribute things.
Yeah.
And I use those interchangeably.
I got just one more question. You were talking about traditional space. Is there any non-traditional space? 'Cause I've read, in some places they're flipping over vacated malls or vacated other, grocery stores or whatever. Is that coming into play because of e-commerce and people want to get closer? Or is it coming into play for any reason?
I have, for years, I've, looked out the window of the car and said to my kids in the back seat, you see that mall there? Figure out what to do with it, because something needs to happen there. Like it's not working for what it's current. There are all kinds of funds that are out there. I get phone calls frequently, hey, we got to go buy, X amount of dollars of buildings, that are non-traditional that we're going to. The best one I saw recently was here in Dallas. There is an office building that was in a very nice location, et cetera, that they're flipping that into condos, right? That there's less office space demand, kind of post-COVID. They're going to turn that into condos, but not a big flip, right? I mean, it's a nice building in a nice part of town. We're not talking about, just a complete transformation. Yeah. The part that I've seen with, again, we all can point to 2 or 3 malls, I'm sure, off the top of our head that are dying. What I haven't seen is they're just not set up for that. They don't have the dock doors. They don't have, and while it makes sense, right? Just the same way it made sense when they built that, is there's a lot of people in that area that are going to be consuming, that omni-channel that we, 10 years ago were all told where things will just, seamlessly pass between us and, in different DCs, et cetera. I haven't seen it in practice. So I love the idea of it, but, and then I would tell you the other side of it is, it's that kind of that not in my backyard, concept is people don't want that. They don't want trucks bringing in pallets of goods, roaring through the residential streets a couple blocks from house. Now, it would be great. I ordered some eye drops last night at 9:00 when my eyes were dry. They were delivered in the middle of the night by Amazon, and they're sitting on my front doorstep. I mean, it's terrific, right? Right. But I don't want that around the corner from me. So I think there's been a lot of discussion about it. I can't point to anyone that's really kind of cracked the code there.
Completely understand. Having run warehouses in the past, the infrastructure, even the roads to support bringing all those trucks in and all those trucks out aren't there. You don't have the clear height that you would really want for storage, even though you're even doing loose piece pick pack. You still need to be able to store product to be able to do that fulfillment. So, yeah.
Well, just to wrap things up, John, tell us where people can find out more about working with you now, if they have questions, if they're listening to this, watching this and saying, this sounds like an interesting way of handling the process that maybe we haven't thought about before.
Well, I'll start by saying thank you both for having me on. I enjoyed it, and thank you for the opportunity. The best way to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Give me a phone call, text 682-308-3902. Best way to get in touch with me.
Excellent. Well, appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much for joining us.
It's our pleasure. Thank you, gentlemen.
That's a great comprehensive look at, with John's background, not only hearing about how things have evolved, but where things are now in terms of, and a little bit of different angle too, in terms of the real estate side too.
Yeah, the part on the labor side, I fully understand. I mean, where we get involved is people are asking us, location, to be able to to meet their delivery requirements that they have for their end customers, or to try to figure out what the best place is on the map to balance their inbound and outbound stuff. So to listen to the labor side, I completely agree with them. Back 15 plus years ago, I was managing warehouses, and you're right. We would just hang up a sign and say, we're hiring, and we would think, okay, we can just grab 100 people. But it's interesting to hear that that's definitely changed.
Yeah, the factors that he mentioned, I mean, labor being, and I mean, we hear it all the time, the industry running into labor issues constantly and in a number of different ways. And then also thinking about that, the automation and the AI sucking up that power, and then you have to be in the right place where you can access it, and it's not gonna, the grid can support it basically, and so that is definitely another factor to consider.
Yeah, and you add into it some of these company-owned warehouses where they have their own dedicated space, and in a lot of cases, they're trying to draw power from their electric trucks, which even puts an additional demand on electricity. So yeah, there's a lot of factors to think about when you're trying to figure out a DC. It's more than just a box with some doors on it, and you need to find some people, and it just gets up and running with no problem.
Yeah. Well, thanks again to John for joining us on this edition, and thank you for joining us as well. Remember, you can like and subscribe, follow us wherever you watch or listen, and drop us a comment. We are happy to hear from you and respond. If you want to shoot us an email, it's podcast@inteklogistics.com, and our website is intekfreight-logistics.com if you want to learn more about what we do. So we'll be back next time with another one. For Rick Lagore, I'm Kevin Baxter.
Thanks again.
Thank you.